Hello, welcome to another tutorial for Unreal Engine made easy. Let's go. In this video, we'll learn how to add some basic interactive character stats such as health and mana or stamina to your player character. Then we'll review how you can spend and regenerate the stats, along with adding them as progress bars to a UI which will update dynamically as the values change. This setup can be applied and expanded upon for a first or third person project as well as a top-down project. We'll start with adding some variables to our player character by creating an actor component so that the values are easily accessible dynamically. Right-click in the content drawer, select Blueprint, and then Actor Component. Name it Component Player Character, or whatever you'd like, and then let's open that up. So we'll add some float variables here. First, let's add a float variable for max health, and then another one for current health. Then let's do the same for mana. First we'll make a float variable for max mana, and then we'll make another one for current mana. Keep in mind that this setup for mana could also be applied or duplicated as stamina instead as well, but we'll just use health and mana for our demonstration here. So now let's compile and then we'll set some values for these variables. You can of course customize these values however you want, but for now we'll just put 100 as the value for all of these to keep it simple. Now we'll quickly just attach this to our player character or player controller. In this case, we'll open up our third-person character blueprint, but it would be the same for a first-person or top-down player pawn or controller as well. Great, so now that we have those variables set up, we can create a simple player UI to show those stats dynamically as progress bars. Right-click in the content drawer, scroll to User Interface, and then Widget Blueprint. Create a user widget, and then we can call it Widget Player UI or whatever you'd like. Then let's open this up and set up some basic UI elements. First, we need to add a canvas panel, so search for that here and then drag it into the hierarchy. Then let's add 2 progress bars by dragging them into the canvas panel. You can of course position them wherever you'd like. I'll put them in the center bottom area for now, and then we'll just label them to stay organized. For the first one here, let's label it as health progress bar, and then the second one we'll label as mana progress bar. Here in the details panel, we can change the color of the progress bar as well. Maybe we'll make the fill color for the health bar red, and then for the mana, we can make it something like a dark blue. If you scroll the percent value here in the progress section, you can get an idea of how the progress bar will look. But of course, the main thing here is making sure that this progress amount is updated dynamically. So let's head to the details panel for our health bar, and then we'll click here next to the percent value and select Create Binding. All we need to do in here is get player pawn or get player controller, depending on your setup, and then we can pull off from there and get component by class. From there, we can find our player component that we created, and then we can get a reference to our current health and max health values from there. We'll simply get a divide node and then divide our current health by our max health. And that's it. So just plug that into the text node here and it will update dynamically. And so we'll go ahead and do the same exact thing for our mana bar, but of course we'll get our current mana and max mana variables instead of the current health and max health variables. If you also want the text of the health amount to be included on top of the progress bar, you could add a text and then set it the same exact way that we did by creating a binding and plugging in the values from the stat variables. And we're all done here for now. So let's head back to our player character again here real quick, and we'll add a create widget node on the begin play. Select the widget player UI that we just created and then drag off from here and type in add to viewport. Now we should be good to test this out and see if the UI with our progress bars of our health and mana are visible. So this looks good, as we can see it's all here, but of course these are just static values currently and we're at max health and max mana. So let's continue our demonstration and move on to the next portion by creating a couple of events to use the stats and change the values during play. First, let's create an example actor which will damage the player. Right-click in the content drawer and select Actor Blueprint. As always, name it as you like and let's open it up. Over in the hierarchy, we'll add a cascade particle system and we can just apply the fire effects from the default starter content. Now that we have that, let's add a collision sphere so that we can detect when the player overlaps with the fire. In the details panel of the collision sphere, let's adjust the collision settings to only overlap on pawn so that it will only apply to our player character. Then we can scroll down here in the details and add an event for on begin overlap. Let's create a looping timed event for burning the target and applying the damage for when they are overlapping with the fire. Every 1 second will be fine, and we can pull off from this pin here and promote a variable so that we'll have a reference to this timer event. Then we can drag off from the other actor pin here and search for apply damage. This is a built-in node in Unreal Engine that makes it easy to trigger damage events between blueprints. Let's say that this will do 20 damage every tick. Cool, so now we can add another event for on-end overlap from the sphere collision the same way that we added the other one. On this one, we'll just simply get a reference to our deal damage timer event variable that we created and then add a node clear and invalidate timer. So if we move out of the fire, it'll stop damaging us. Looks good, that should work for our demonstration here. Now let's head back to our player character blueprint. Just like we used the built-in node for apply damage, you can also utilize this one for event any damage. So we can add that here, and then let's get our attached actor component where we put the stat values by dragging it into the graph from the hierarchy on the left. Now we can get a reference to our current health variable. Drag off from the current health and place a subtract node. Then we can pull off from the incoming damage amount pin here and apply that to the amount that we are subtracting. Then we'll get a set node for our current health variable and apply the amount from our subtract node. But we still have one little problem here, which is that even if the player already has no health left, it will still continue to take the health into negative values. So if we want it to stop at 0 health because the character would essentially be dead, we can just add a clamp float node here. Just set the minimum to 0 and the maximum to 100, since those are the values that we set for our character. Now we've successfully set up an incoming damage mechanic, which will be reflected on the UI. So we'll also create another event for spending mana. Let's just create an example event by adding a key to trigger here. I'll go ahead and just use the number 1 key. So when we press this, let's spawn a particle effect to visualize as if we're using a special ability. We can add the node here, spawn emitter at location, and for this one, maybe we can just use the sparks effects from the default starter content. For the location, we can just go get actor location, which automatically is referencing self, and plug that in. Let's also just increase the scale so it's more clearly visible when we click it. And then similar to how we deducted the health in the other event, here we'll deduct mana. So we'll get a reference to our current mana variable from our actor component, and then we'll subtract the cost of using this ability. We can say, for example, this will cost 20 mana. We also want to clamp the values between 0 and 100 just as we did before, and then we'll set our current mana variable and plug it into the result of the clamp node. Since the particle system doesn't turn off automatically, we can add that here real quick just for visual clarity in the demonstration. I'll just add a quick delay node at the end of this and then pull off from the spawned emitter pin and add a deactivate node. So let's drag one of our example fire damage actors that we created into our level. And now we can test it to see if the values are reflected on the UI if we take damage or spend mana with our example events that we created. Nice, we can see that if we step into the fire, we're taking damage, and if we step out, then the damage stops. I'll also test a couple mana abilities by pressing 1 for our example event that we created. That's looking pretty good too. So we can see that our progress bars on the UI are responding dynamically to the values here. Nice, so everything's on track so far. But let's also add a simple regeneration event for our character stats so that we can see them going back up as well. On begin play, we can add a looping timed event. And again, we can pull off from the pin here and then promote this to a variable and set a reference to the timer event. Let's say, for example, that maybe every 2 seconds the player will regenerate 10 health and mana. And we'll want to clamp the values as we did before. So we can just get our current health, add 10, clamp it, and then plug that into a set current health node. And we can copy and paste this and do the same exact thing for mana, so we're regenerating that as well. Now let's see if we take damage or use some mana, the progress bars should regenerate along with the stat values. Alright, so we'll go ahead and step into the fire again here, and as we're taking damage, we can also see that we're regenerating our health, and that is reflected here on the progress bar. And then same thing if we use some mana, that's also being regenerated as well, so that's all looking good. I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and now you can expand on this however you'd like. Keep in mind this video is just for the concepts of the interactive stats and displaying the values dynamically on a player UI and triggering events along with it. You can tie that usage to any event or action and apply these techniques however you want. You can deduct mana or stamina from a variety of different player abilities or interactions. And maybe if the player character runs out of health, you could end the game or trigger a cinematic cutscene. Or maybe you want to create a custom HUD class for your UI widget and alter where the player stat variables are set. It's really up to you. Thanks for watching this video. Feel free to let me know in the comments below if you have any feedback or questions. And check out my channel here for more tutorials, tips, and information on Unreal Engine made easy. See you in the next one. Thanks. Peace.